Okay, so thank you very much for your kind invitation and for possibility to share my ideas with you and to discuss such interesting topic like astrobioethical challenges around future space missions. I am currently at Yale Interdisciplinary Center for Bioethics as a visiting fellow, visiting researcher in this academic year, but my main affiliation is University of Information Technology and Management in Rzeszów in Poland. And my area of interest includes currently mostly space bioethics, but also applied ethics, also population ethics, human enhancement, not necessary in the context of space missions, also Earth, and such topics on the intersection of future studies, technology. So I treat this context of future space missions like a kind of case study, which is a part of the broader picture. I mean, what can meet humanity in the future at the intersection of highly advanced technology, biotechnology, genetic engineering. And I assume that space exploration and space exploitation may be a really important and substantial part of of human future. So I think that we have a lot of good reasons to start to think about this right now, because what is my assumption? When we are able to identify some bioethical issues or ethical issues now, maybe we will change our plans regarding our future exploration of space. For instance, I mean such scenario when you will find that if you will decide to, this is just example, of course, it depends on the progress in our technology. So another problem is, I should also mention now in this introductory part, that we are talking about some topics today with current state of knowledge and current state of technology. Having this current state, we are talking what we can do in 20 or 50 years in space. But when we will come to that point in 20 or 50 years, we will have probably a lot of new technology and a lot of new solutions. So maybe we will be not up to date regarding our ethical concerns. And it's also possible that what is controversial today will be not controversial 20 years ago. And as you know, in bioethics, this is the basic example that what was very controversial a few decades ago, today is some almost commonly shared procedure, like for instance, transplantation or in vitro fertilization. Of course, there are some controversies in some places in the world, but more or less in general, these medical procedures are accepted. And it can be the same with germline gene editing, which is today very controversial and is prohibited for clinical application, only for research purposes in some limited extent, but maybe it will be treated as standard procedure, at least in some situations in the future. So we will talk about astrobioethics or space bioethics, but space bioethics or astrobioethics can be treated as part of a bigger picture. I mean, space ethics or space philosophy. While space bioethics and astrobioethical issues are relatively new, of course, we can find some texts published, for instance, 16, 17 years ago in some medical journals, but they are only 2 or 3 pages long. But I mean, as some general, I mean, like some new field of study which is developed, which is deeply developed and studied. This is rather something new: space bioethics, astrobioethics. But it can be a part or one of many branches of space ethics, space philosophy, which exists from decades. And the main topics I will just briefly mention what are other topics discussed in space philosophy and space ethics, which I will not discuss here. But very interdisciplinary project, so it's possible that your decision, how you will evaluate morally some application of some biomedical procedures in space or for purposes of space missions, will depend on this, how you will solve other issues and other problems regarding environmental ethics or rationale for space missions. My another assumption in this context is this rationale and justification for space missions, depending if this is research mission, commercial, or mission working as a kind of space refuge, can affect, can influence ethical justification, moral justification for biomedical procedures in space. So main topic in space ethics is environmental ethics. Another topic, justification for space missions, very interdisciplinary, connected, overlapping with social, political, or financial issues. Another important branch of interest is search for extraterrestrial intelligence and messaging extraterrestrial intelligence, also very rich source of philosophical discussions, like, for instance, should we inform possible extraterrestrial intelligence that we exist? What if they have some hostile approach to us, etc., etc. And finally, space bioethics. And one of possible approaches to this topic is to divide future possible future exploration of space into three main kinds of missions, like scientific missions, commercial exploitation of space, I mean like space mining, space tourism, and something like that, and the concept of space settlement, space refuge, space colonization, space colony. I don't discuss controversies around the meaning of word colonization or colony very often. When I am using this word, reviewers argue that I should not use such words due to historical connotations, but of course I am familiar with this historical stuff, just it doesn't matter for bioethical conclusions. So this is just technical term. You can call colony, you can call settlement, you can call base, doesn't matter in this context, of course, but from cultural and anthropological perspective is of course it's of course very important. So in my opinion, we can find three main types of space missions, like scientific, commercial, and disoriented, to support survival of humanity. I don't talk about military missions or political missions, because it's obvious that they will probably, this political and military component probably will be at work in all of them. And this is bad, because always when mission is militarized and when politics is involved, it will affect all decisions, all conclusions, everything. So, but this is also important for discussion about application of radical human enhancement for the context of space missions. This is one of questions which I got from you, and I hope I will address these questions, mentioning also this context of militarization. I think that every kind of space exploration produces some unique ethical and bioethical controversies. We can ask some good ethical, philosophical, and bioethical questions regarding every kind of space missions. For instance, regarding scientific missions, this is missions currently realized and planned in the near future, which are aimed to, which are oriented mostly at astrobiological questions, like the second genesis of life, if there was any life or on Mars, etc. First ethical issue is the environmental problem with contamination, our right to explore, to exploit, and something like that. Another ethical problem, conflict of priorities. What we should do in situation when now we treat science as important and strategical. It's rational and it's reasonable that first we should let scientists explore Mars, for instance, or other space location scientifically, because later, after contamination, this location will not be attractive from scientific point of view. But what is situation when some hypothetical scenario in the future where we will have some conflict of interest between different kinds of missions? For instance, what is situation when unexpectedly some private businessman will be able to realize commercial exploitation of space, and it can be realized faster than planned scientific exploration? This is interesting case. Now we are calm, we are talking, okay, science is important because we don't have any competitors, we don't have any alternatives. But what in situation when this space around Mars will be more crowded than now, and people will be interested not only in making science, but also in making business? Another ethical issue is human enhancement for scientific missions in situation when we think that we should send human astronauts, not only robots, for instance, to Mars or other locations in space. Do we have a moral right to apply human enhancement? Regarding commercial exploitation, main ethical issues which arise are the issue of ownership. Of course, this is on the intersection of law and philosophy, priorities in space policy, the issue of collaboration or conflict between space agencies. There is a lot of scenarios, what can happen, war or peace in space exploration. And also the topic of human enhancement for commercial exploitation was also a very good question, which I got from you. What about if we will have such situation that some private investors will offer human enhancement for space employers? Should they accept such situation? I will come back to this topic later, but this is also a very good question. And last but not least, also very big idea, space settlement, space colonization, space refuge. Also a lot of ethical issues around, like for instance, the possibility of application of radical human enhancement, including germline gene editing. It can sound like science fiction scenario, but let's assume that humanity can face some kind of global catastrophic risk on Earth, doesn't matter what kind of, and we assume that we as humanity should colonize space to allow survive at least some part of population. By the way, this is another big question. Who can go to space in such situation? What will be selection criteria according to gender, according to sex, age, health, and thousands other criteria? It's also a very big question. Who can go and who wants to go? It will be some pressure or it will be voluntary. A lot of topics around. But let's assume that we should do that. We have to do that in 50 years, 100, 300 years ago, and to survive in space. Let's assume that the further living on Earth will be impossible, or at least migrations between Earth and space settlement will be impossible. We should reproduce in space. And what about such situation? Let's assume that until that point, 100, 200, 300 years ahead, we have highly developed genetic engineering technologies. So we can apply a lot of different kinds of germline gene editing targeted at many different goals. So should we apply not only to improve our resistance to space radiation in this new space location, but also maybe to improve some of our cognitive or moral capacities, if it will be possible, of course, from genetic point of view. So also a lot of questions around this reproductive issues, not only germline gene editing, embryo selection, other issues, even mating criteria. I mean, situation when humans can reproduce in space. What should be assumed if we really will treat space location and as our new home in the in the future? Another topic, more philosophical than biological, is the ethics of quality of life in space. What about in situation with living in space colony will be not attractive alternative for us? There is such philosophy, very unpopular, I guess, antinatalism, which states that we should not reproduce because future people will suffer, and also because these future people will cause harm. So because the pleasure and pain ratio is always showing that in our life we have much more pain than pleasure. So in this situation, these antinatalist philosophers recommend humanity to not reproduce, to stop this production of suffering for future generations. So it can be like that with space colony, that life conditions, living conditions in space colony can be very challenging and problematic for many reasons. For instance, we don't know if we will have the freedom of migration, the freedom of movement. If we will have a right to come back Earth, it will be possible, of course. And a lot of such stuff which we enjoy every day on Earth, and philosophers ask if it will be life worth living, not just biological survival, but life worth living, to enjoy human rights, human freedoms, human liberty. So this is also interesting perspective. And good questions, more maybe philosophical than yes, definitely, I think philosophical. We can formulate like, do we have a right to destroy space environment? Destroy, I mean exploit, explore, contaminate. We know that we know what humanity already did on Earth in the sense of pollution, exploitation of resources. We don't know what will happen in the future, how we will treat new space location. So anyway, we should ask if we have right to exploit, to destroy space environment for scientific purposes, commercial purposes, or purposes of space colonization. Maybe we have such right, maybe no. There is also a lot of different positions in philosophy, in space ethics. And another correlated issue on the intersection of philosophy and biology is if can we radically modify people to send them to space for scientific mission, commercial. We should target. So this is just spacecraft or some drugs. The same the same question we can ask regarding commercial exploitation of space colonization. We can ask if Also depends what it means commercial purposes. If someone wants to go for space trip and you will tell him, okay, but to survive this trip, for instance, around the moon or around Mars or to Mars and back, or doesn't matter what kind of, to come back safely, we have to apply genome editing. We can say, okay, this is informed consent, voluntary decision of this individual, he can do that. But what about in situation when it will be treated like attractive job place, and someone who is against this procedure, let's assume that it is a little bit risky, will have such moral dilemma if it should be required or not. This is also a lot of topics around this stuff. Of course, it depends on what kind of human enhancement we are talking about, pharmacological or, for instance, genome editing or others. And the same about space colonization. We can say that this is very strong reasons to go to space. And if someone will tell us that if you will not go to space, you will die, humanity will die, our species will die, this is very strong reasons to do everything to provide further existence of our species. But another issue arises. Let's call them social justice issues and fair access, equal and open access. Some philosophers claim that the space colonization should be available to everyone, like using airplanes is available to everyone now. To go to airplane, you don't need gene editing. You don't need any kind of enhancement. You don't need even to have some good health, like military pilot, for instance, or like civil pilot. You can just buy ticket and go to airplane. And they make such parallel that the same should be about future access to space exploration, doesn't matter. It will be for touristic reasons, commercial, or maybe space settlement. I don't want to go deeper to this topic. This is just such idea for discussion or of possible interest. And regarding space bioethics or astrobioethics, what is one of basic questions? If this is the following question: can we say that the ethical and bioethical environment in space is substantially different from Earth environment? This is difficult questions, and I am not sure what is right answer. If this is qualitative difference or quantitative difference. Some people compare space exploration missions to Antarctic exploration, which we know from history, or they compare space mission environment to military ethics, for instance. These parallels are good, at least to some extent, because really, when you are in such hierarchical structure, like army, for instance, you know that you don't have the same level of autonomy and freedom and liberty like your colleague who is not in army. And we as society accept such restrictions, even in liberal democracies. We know, we accept, we are not disappointed or disgusted morally when we hear that, listen, this soldier had to follow this and this order. They limit his autonomy or freedom. We accept. This is like some service, like being on duty, something like that. So anyway, currently realized space missions are militarized in some way. They have such structure, more or less very similar. And now, in the second part, I would like to talk more about human enhancement and genome editing, but more from ethical and bioethical perspective than genetic or scientific or medical. In my approach, because everyone can have his own approach to space bioethics, like to bioethics in general, space bioethics is mainly about human enhancement for space. This is the main topic. This is the, of course, we have a lot of other ethical issues. Some of them I introduced you before, but they are not bioethical, like environmental ethics, rationale, etc. They are not bioethical. I mean bioethical issues related to technology and human body. In my opinion, human enhancement is the biggest challenge, but of course not only, because space bioethics is what already happens from decades in orbital missions, like for instance, about informed consent, autonomy, medical data, privacy of astronauts, because it's very easy to identify astronauts seeing his medical data. This is a very small community. There is a kind of pressure that astronaut theoretically can withdraw, can decline to participate in some experiment during mission, but he can expect that he will be not invited anymore to next mission. A competition is very big. The number of these free spots available for next missions are very narrow, very small. So all of them are very important bioethical questions. But I won't go one step ahead and talk about human enhancement. I mean, how we can improve, how far we can go in our approach to improve human body, maybe also human psychology, and maybe as the last step, human morality, if possible, of course, from biological point of view, how far we can go in such approach, such attempt to make space missions safer, more effective, more successful. So the first question is if it's really needed. Next question, if it's not really needed, anyway, maybe it's better to send astronauts who are anyway enhanced to some extent than non-enhanced. And of course, a lot of different parallels we can draw between Earth context and space. But let me start for such short conceptual and definitional issues. What is human enhancement? How can we define human enhancement? Some philosophers say that every improvement is enhancement, but enhancement can be health-related or not health-related. This health-related enhancements include mostly prevention and treatment. Non-health-related are treated as enhancement aimed at trivial issues, like, for instance, to improve intelligence, morality, height, muscles, or something like that, which is not related to your health and therapy. Anyway, it means improvement by biomedical means. I mean, human enhancement by biomedical means, because what we are doing every day is human enhancement by diet, by exercise, by education. We enhance ourselves. And what are main bioethical controversies? Some of enhancements are controversial, while others are not. These uncontroversial enhancements include mentioned diet, exercise, education. We enhance our memory by using laptops, computers, even notebook, even book. This is enhancement of our memory, of our cognition. What I can remember, what kind of mathematical operation I can do without any stuff, very small, very poor. So everything is a kind of enhancement of my mind, my brain, but this is not controversial. What is controversial is biomedical human enhancement. This is a kind of enhancement which biomedical human enhancement includes such procedures like genetic modification, different kinds of brain-computer interfaces, various types of implants. I just want to be focused on gene editing or genome editing, genetic modifications. They are discussed as especially controversial, mostly germline gene editing, because somatic gene editing by somatic gene editing, for instance, is already applied, and if we will meet criteria of safety and efficacy, many people will not be controversial. Many people will not be against this procedure. But germline gene editing is another issue, mostly due to the fact that, except medical risk, gene editing is heritable. So the problem is that these changes, which prospective parents today will apply to their future children, will equip these children and children of these children in such features which maybe will not match well to this new environment which these children of these future children will meet. This is the problem, that now we equip by germline gene editing, we are going to create some, I mean about positive selection, when we want to create or enhance something. I don't talk about negative selection when we want to prevent or repair something. I am talking about when we are going to create some new feature or enhance currently possessed by this embryo, this future person. These children of this modified children will live probably in totally different conditions. So this is challenge, not just, this is not only ethical challenge, this is also, let's say, environmental challenge, more or less technical challenge, not only ethical, of course, ethical, philosophical, first of all, but also practical. But we can say that this first generation of genetically edited children as embryos, they can also modify genome on their own children to adapt them better to this new expected environment. So it's also one of the solutions. But what is controversial regarding biomedical human enhancement, like for instance gene editing? For simplicity, let's talk only about gene editing. Philosophers and bioethicists usually mention such criteria like invasiveness, irreversibility, heredity. For instance, according to critics or bioconservatives, biomedical human enhancement is controversial because it's invasive. But we can ask, but what is not invasive? For instance, surgical operation are very invasive. But gene editing, I think, is invasive in another way, in different way than transplantation, for instance, is invasive. We don't have moral problems with surgical operation because they are invasive. We don't care, but we care. Many people care about human genome editing because of its invasiveness, because when you edit genes, this is invasive in another way than, for instance, transplantation can be invasive. Genome editing is invasive in this sense that you touch something like, some philosophers like such term like human nature. I don't like such term, but many philosophers use such term like human nature. So you touch something what is very personal, like a kind of DNA, and this is why they oppose against such kind of invasiveness. Another criterion is irreversibility. Many people who are skeptical about biomedical human enhancement, they can tell that, okay, we can accept, for instance, we can accept, for instance, genome editing or another kind of biomedical human enhancement, but only if it is reversible, when individual can come back to the starting point. They are right and wrong. They are right because what about in situation if future children genetically modified as embryo will be unhealthy? happy having particular modification which he got as embryo. Probably he cannot reverse this modification. So, or if something will go wrong, or in the context of space mission, let's assume that after genome editing, astronauts or other participants of space mission, they can have problem with readaptation to Earth, or with moving from one space location to another, if we assume that environmental conditions will be so drastically different that this genome adaptation designed for this particular space location will not allow go safely to another space location or to come back Earth. So in this sense, irreversibility is a kind of human right. You have right to come back to your starting point or to location which you want to go to. But on the other side, they are wrong, because when you will take a look at other kind of modifications and human enhancement, which humanity used from centuries, not biomedical, of course, like education, for instance, you will see that they are also irreversible. For instance, our literacy capacity. We can read. I am not sure what I have to do to lose capacity to read. I think it's a very hard task. I mean, no brain damage, no such stuff. Just what kind of exercises and effort I have to do to lose my capacity to read and to understand. I am not sure if it is possible. I mean, without some medical condition. So in some sense, it is also irreversible. Or when you speak some languages from childhood, I think it's also very hard, but of course possible. When you will migrate somewhere and you will lose your contact with language, probably, I think some people will stop to talk in this home, this original language after years. But anyway, there is a lot of human enhancements which we cannot reverse. We cannot come back to starting point. So when you will take such position, you will see that not only biomedical human enhancement can be irreversible, but also many other enhancements which we apply even to children without their informed consent, they are also irreversible. I mean, at least in normal conditions. And last but not least, what is controversial? The issue of autonomy and informed consent, mostly regarding germline gene editing, when prospective parents don't ask embryos what kind of modification they wish to get or which they wish not to get. But on the other side, we can say that parents don't ask about many other issues, starting from literacy, starting from numerical capacity, starting from learning language, this or that. So I am not sure if there is something unique in these objections which we address to biomedical human enhancement. What is also important in this discussion regarding controversiality of biomedical human enhancement, means versus degree. My position is that what is controversial is means. For instance, what is controversial? Means by which you apply particular modifications. For instance, let's assume we have exam tomorrow. One student will study very hard for weeks, for months. Another student will improve his memory or general cognitive capacity by some drugs or a kind of somatic gene editing. Let's assume it's possible, that it is possible medically. We also know that people appreciate hard work in many societies, in many cultures. Hard working individual is appreciated. This is like a virtuous individual. Hard, honest work is like a kind of human virtue. So for some reasons, humans appreciate effort, appreciate hard work, appreciate if you achieved something by yourself. what matters, I think there are means how we can achieve some modifications, and the example of sport competition is very good example. I mean, using doping, using some illegal forbidden drugs to improve your performance as an athlete in sport competition shows in very good way what we mean when we are talking about means. We expect that this athlete will achieve this performance, high performance, physical performance by his hard work, by exercise, not by drugs, for instance. And here is this example which I mentioned already, that there is a difference between student who achieve knowledge through hard work and another student who got genetic modification, for instance, to improve memory. Of course, this is maybe not too much controversial. Someone can say maybe this is a little bit unfair, like when we compare such hard-working student with another one who, for instance, cheated during an exam. I think they are a little bit ethically parallel situations. But we can ask, what can be controversial? Why it should matter? And around this topic, many commentators argue that we meet such challenges like social justice, fair access, that application of biomedical human enhancement will increase currently existing disparities between people. Maybe yes, it's possible, but on the other side, we already have a lot of disparities and inequalities in the world. For instance, regarding education, higher education, regarding many other issues, there are big differences, unfortunately, in human population. So I don't believe that biomedical human enhancement will contribute something new to this situation regarding social justice and fair or open access. What I assume is that purpose and context matter ethically. I mean that in some situations we have moral right to accept even controversial, radical human enhancement, like for instance germline gene editing, dependently on context, on purpose, on situation. Of course, it matters what kind of ethical position you will take. If you are bioliberal, you will say, doesn't matter, you decide, just you should meet criteria of safety and efficacy. But if you will meet this criteria, you can apply even radical human enhancement for trivial purposes, which are not related to your health. Bioconservatives, or they will treat every human enhancement as controversial, or they will accept only enhancements applied for therapeutical purposes like prevention or treatment. And here is one of questions from you, which I would try, maybe I will try to address now. Very good question. Is there a way to legalize human enhancement specifically for space travel, or does that open the door to designer babies and outside force of human enhancement? This is a very good question, which I put here because I think this is compatible with what we already discussed about. Let's assume that we will have to apply biomedical human enhancement for purposes of future space missions, because we will figure out that this level of space radiation and altered gravity, they influence human body, human physiology and psychology to such extent that we cannot protect this future deep space missions astronauts by traditional means. That we should use this solution, which we find, of course, controversial. But we want to avoid these problems which we are talking about right now, social problems, that when you will once apply human enhancement only for purposes of space mission, you will open path for very broad application in all fields of human and social life. This is a risk. I agree that such risk, of course, exists. This is a kind of slippery slope argument where you assume that if you will allow for action A only for medical purposes, after some time, this point A is point when you think that you can never cross. But you will find that for very rare situation with very heavy medical conditions, you can apply human enhancement. After some point, you will find yourself in point B where you will think, okay, but this medical issues are also challenging. Why we should accept? Why we should allow this individual suffer? Why we accepted in point A a few months ago human enhancement only for disease 1, 2, disease A, B, C. What about D, E, F, etc.? Let's reduce human suffering, and then you will go after a few months to the point C. You started here, and later you will go by point B, later point C, to the point where you will think, but someone has depression, he is not happy. Okay, his medical condition, physiological condition is very good, but his mental condition could be better. Why don't improve his mental condition by application human enhancement? And this is possible, of course, and this is how human society works in many cases, I think, regarding such technologies. Of course, we need time. We don't have good parallels from the past because everything started recently in 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. So we don't have such, we are not in the position that we have behind 500 years or 1000 and we can see what humans did with this biomedical technology. We don't have such situation. We don't know what will happen in 10 years, in 50 years, but I think it is possible. But on the other side, what is good in a space environment? I mean, good from bioconservative approach, good for people who can be a little bit scared regarding application of human enhancement technologies to society outside of the context of space travels. What is good that I think that space missions will be militarized, will be very restricted, very exclusivist, not available for many people like now, at least in first years, first decades of these deep space missions like to Mars or other similar location. So when they will be militarized, I don't believe that army and government of this or another country will allow to use this technology outside. Paradoxically, this is for conservatives, it can be some advantage, some benefit when army, when government will be involved, because it can be like with the internet, which in first years has been used only for internal communication inside army. The same can be with, for instance, genome editing, that for safety and security reasons, to get advantage over competitors, over possible enemies, as long as it will be controlled by government and army, if these missions will be militarized and these applications will have also military applications, I am sure that that the space organizers will not allow these technologies to go outside. I think they will try to keep them only for their own use as long as possible. Of course, as long as possible in current times. I am not sure how long it is possible, because we have also a lot of biotechnologies companies which are interested in which try to develop such biotechnologies, genetic engineering, to commercialize them. So this is a very challenging issue, and hard to say in which way it can go. Just this is what is my intuition now. That what is good that these technologies, if ever applied, they will be applied only to very narrow field of human activity, which is very restricted, which is not available almost to anyone outside. In this sense, we can expect that this transmission, this transfer to the rest of society will not come very fast. So this is my intuition regarding this very good point. And I also think that it's possible that that the context of space missions can be the first field of human life where this radical biomedical enhancements can be applied more or less broadly. It will be not for military applications, not for other purposes, just I think for space missions. Of course, if humanity will make some substantial progress and will decide that this deep space exploration is our target. And going to conclusion, I just wanted to mention that what is my approach when I'm talking about human enhancements for purposes of space missions. I treat these human enhancements as strictly related to health issues. So I am not talking about science fiction like human enhancements, which you can meet in many, not only science fiction literature, what is obvious, but also in some academic journals. That you can find conception like it would be good to be able to breathe an atmosphere containing carbon dioxide or other stuff like that. This is not what I am talking about. I am focused on such enhancements which are reasonable, which are medically justified, and more or less technically possible, like mostly protection against space radiation, effects of altered gravity, and maybe possibly some kind of cognitive psychological enhancement to cope with such issues like isolation, distance from Earth, closed space, and others. And at the end, instead of some ready conclusions, I would like to offer you some questions, maybe without ready answers. I think there are questions which are still open, which are waiting for some elaboration, which can be answered positively or negatively. Still discussion is open. Like if we know that only human enhancement, like for instance, genome editing, can guarantee protection against negative factors in space, should we apply it? If we will not apply, if we will take bioconservative approach like this one, which we have now on Earth, towards, for instance, germline gene editing, we should accept consequences of our decision, namely that we should postpone some space missions until such point in the future when we will find alternative countermeasures. So every bioethical decision has consequences in the long future. Another question, this enhancement applied for the context of space missions is more therapeutic or more enhancement? What is challenging here? Astronauts are perfectly healthy individuals. They are not sick and weak people. So you are going to modify people who have perfect health and perfect conditions. So this is very far from therapy. But on the other side, it's health related. So maybe these concepts like therapy enhancement don't fit well to this discussion, or maybe they fit, but we have new situation. Maybe this is what is new in the context of space bioethics. So this is there are these alternatives like robotic missions or decision to postpone human mission to avoid application of controversial biomedical procedures. This is very good questions which I got from you. Would individuals that have received extensive genetic modifications in order to adapt to a space environment still be considered human? This is a very good question. I can try to address in the following way. It depends what you define by a human being. If you are able to find some substantial features which define human being, what constitutes human being? If you can show which feature is the most important, if you can show if there is any feature which will be modified or lost, will lead to the situation that this individual will be not any longer considered as human. So this is the question which, as I mentioned, philosophers like to talk about human nature. I don't like this concept. But more or less we know what philosophers who use the term human nature have in mind: rationality, consciousness, language capacity, and such stuff. So let's make such thought experiment. For instance, let's assume that it's possible from medical and genetic point of view that you can enhance human rationality to very high level, and you will make hyper-rational human being. Let's assume that it is possible by, for instance, genome editing and other biomedical modifications. So if you will modify human being to make him hyper-rational, do you change him? He will stop to be human being. What it means hyper-rationality? For instance, if I am making decisions in daily life in a very rational way, let's assume that my every decision is rational, no emotions, no intuitions, no memories, nothing like that, only reason, only rational. I am hyper-rational. You can call me, this guy is hyper-rational because all his life, all his decisions he made only in rational way, no emotions, no feelings, no intuitions. But if you will look at particular decision, for instance, check his decision which he made 2 weeks ago, Monday morning. It was rational. But when you will analyze this particular decision, this is just rational. Something like hyper-rational does not exist when you want to describe particular action. You can use the term hyper-rational to call someone through all his life or some period of time that he behaves only in rational ways, so he sounds like hyper-rational. But he's just rational. Just this is incredible accumulation of rational acts. For instance, in our case, let's assume this is 10, 20, 30% of decisions, and this hyper-rational guy has accumulation 100%. That we call him hyper-rational. Or how you can change, this is one way how you can change. Of course, this is just thought experiment. It doesn't matter it's possible genetically or not, but let's assume that it is possible. You will have very rational humans, but they are still humans. We are still assume that rationality is the crucial feature of humanity. Yes, we don't talk about another feature. I chose rationality because rationality is traditionally treated by many philosophers, by ethicists, like the substance of human being. what you can do with human enhancement, another regarding rationality. You can make human irrational. How it will work? That all 100% of our decisions will be irrational, but it will be not human enhancement. Because I think that we are prone to agree that rationality is rather better than irrationality. Or what is your idea, for instance? You can choose one of two options. I know that that none of them is good. You can be all your life only rational or only irrational. What you will choose?
Only rational.
Irrational.
Hopefully. I mean, I'd hope to be rational, but yeah, I guess that's not 100% possible.
Yes, but this is interesting thought experiment that rather we are prone to agree that rationality is something which we want to meet in many places. Yes, for instance, in a social interactions, you expect that second person will be rational than irrational. For instance, if I will start to dance and sing, you can be a little bit surprised. So what do you expect? That I will talk about space and bioethics, that I will not now dance and sing. Yes, this is some rational expectation of rational behavior. This is why another alternative, making humans irrational by biomedical enhancement, is not enhancement. Because enhancement means, like we told a few slides ago, enhancement is improvement. So, of course, something can go wrong, and you can make all humanity irrational, but it is not improvement. Another issue is that to change humanity, to change human species, you can do that only at population level. So individual modifications can matter, but they don't matter at the population level as the whole species. So, to finish this question, I think that it's very, very hard to find possible scenarios where you can talk about some dramatic, radical modification of human species until such point that we will find that they are not any longer humans. I don't believe it's possible. Another good question. Assuming that private companies develop extensive space operations in the future, should these companies have the ability to offer employees biological enhancements to improve their output? So this is the question which is now a little bit discussed in the context of Earth. This is the question. If I know that some cognitive, because in the context of job market, mostly we are talking about cognitive enhancement. If we know that some cognitive enhancements are available, should I apply them? Or if I am employer, should I offer my workers such enhancements? They are both pros and cons, and it's again depends what position you will take. Some commentators see that here they are even talking directly about capitalistic exploitation. Now people are working a lot, but after application of human enhancement for purposes of work, they will work much harder. They mean that this what is extreme now will be norm. That they are talking about the normalization of extreme situation. Let's assume people will work not 8-10 hours, but 15 hours or 17, and it will be normal, it will be standard. It can be dangerous from medical point of view. It can be something which we don't want to see in our society from social point of view, economic. Hard to say. The question is if this improvements can be necessary from some medical biological point of view, or only they will be invited by employers from commercial point of view. The second case I think if it would be something radically different than cognitive enhancement already available, I think we should be careful. But if we are going to repeat what we already have on Earth, I don't see a new ethical situation. And here is, okay, almost last slide. I have been asked also what can be the most important ethical challenge for scientists and doctors regarding this future, this our current effort to go to space. So I think that there are such two ethical challenges. One of them is environmental. Another one is medical, biological, and of course bioethical. This is as follows. The question is, or dilemma, moral epistemic dilemma. In the absence of full knowledge and many unknowns, can human enhancement for space missions be accepted? More and more, also scientists, not only philosophers, are talking about the fact that currently applied countermeasures may be not effective. They are talking that, for instance, these shielding walls in spacecraft can protect, are effective only in 30–40%. They are talking about many unknown factors. We don't know too much about long-term consequences of exposure to space radiation. What is worse? We should change our strategy of who we are sending to space. Now space agencies usually send older astronauts, but what about younger generation? What about commercialization? Maybe even space settlement in the future. We should also allow younger people, maybe even children in the future, to go to space. We don't know how they will develop in space environment with such big exposure to space radiation, how this exposure can affect, for instance, child development. What will be long-term consequences? And the collateral question is it possible to risk sending people on distant missions without human enhancement? And the context of today's state of knowledge is problematic here, because we are talking about this now having very limited knowledge and very limited countermeasures. We don't know what will happen in the next 10, 20, or 30 years, which when such missions can be our reality. And this is the very last slide. I would like emphasize one more time that context matters ethically. My position is that the ethical position which is closer to me is consequential, is to look at consequences. For instance, we can of course look at some principles, some duty-based principle like the principle of autonomy, the principle of justice. All these principles are very important and they matter. But what I think, what is important, there are outcomes. And we should, when we are talking about human enhancement, or in the context of space, or in the context of Earth, I think we should first ask what kind of outcomes we want to get. We want to get population of people who are healthy, or people where some big parts has a lot of different kinds of diseases. I mean, such genetically, I mean genetic disease. And I of course assume that genome editing could make us free from these diseases. So this is of course important assumption. So the question is, what is outcome which you want to see? Such society with diseases or society without these genetic diseases? Another example, more maybe more fantastic, less realistic, but broadly discussed by philosophers, like moral bioenhancement. Philosophers usually are talking about altruism, sense of justice, why people are not better. Of course, it's very complicated from logistic point of view. Let's imagine how you will now improve morality. Let's assume that it is possible. This is another case. Maybe it will be never possible. But let's assume for the purposes of our discussion, that you can improve some moral behaviors, ideas, patterns, decision making, how you will apply to almost 8 billion people population, how you will do that, to whom? Okay, you will epidemiology approach is important here, like the vaccination rate. How many percent you should modify morally to get better society, 20, 50, maybe 70. So of course, this is a lot of speculation around, because I mean that let's assume that such moral biomodification is possible to make people better morally. So the question is, what kind of society you want to see? Society with better people, which are modified, or society with good and bad people like the one which we have today? So this is the question for outcomes. What do you want to see? Not about principles, which you take care a lot, and because you take care for this principle, you block to get some outcomes. I don't mean that all principles are wrong, no. Just I mean that we should be careful with situation where following some principle inhibit us to get some good outcomes. It is possible if you will take duty-based approach. For instance, you will tell the principle of autonomy is the most important, or the principle of more moral and metaphysical human dignity, and you cannot, for instance, modify human genome because of dignity, human nature, and such stuff. And I think that this context matter. And my last point, even some conservatives can agree that, okay, let's assume that human enhancement for space missions is really needed because we cannot cope with space radiation and effects of altered gravity. So we should modify these future astronauts or possibly space settlers in the long future, but only if mission is not trivial, like to provide survival for human species. But on the other side, which mission is trivial, which is not trivial? We can say that it's possible that what seems to be trivial today may be necessary step to achieve higher level in space exploration. For instance, we can say that this space business, space tourism now in United States is something trivial. Someone will tell that, why does people waste money in such irrational way just to fly around orbit few minutes or several minutes? But maybe this is necessary step to make some progress to achieve some point in the next decades, which we don't know that this is substantial part in this our path to this this higher level in this advancement in science in space technology. Okay, many thanks for your attention. Sorry that it was long. It was so long.
No, maybe, it's okay.
Maybe I addressed too much topics. Maybe I should focus on one topic, but okay.
No, I think it was good to hit everything. I mean, I personally took away some interesting things. I never thought about learning a language or an education as a modification. I always thought, modification would be something genetic or physical.
Yes, look, they are. Look at our evolutionary history. When we will take a look where we were 100,000 years ago, I think we were in something what today is Africa. Mm-hmm. We differ substantially, more or less, from how we look and what we are now. Mm-hmm. So if we will tell that we cannot modify anything, mm-hmm. we should come back even to our ancestor, our common ancestor of human and chimpanzee, 5-7 million years ago, probably. Mm-hmm. If our ancestors will stop in Africa 100 or 80,000 years ago, something like today, contemporary human species will never exist. So this is evolutionary approach is good here. I think evolutionary biological approach should rather support such modifications, because evolution is permanent change. Yes, everything is changing. There is nothing permanent, nothing stable. So from that point of view, when we will look, what is natural state of human being? To not talk, to not speak any language, to not use technology. Hard to say in which moment we were natural, maybe 100,000 years ago, maybe 20, maybe a few thousand years ago before we invented some writing. I don't know what was natural. So in this case, we are totally different. They're other than non-human animal species, because when you will look at other non-human animal species, you can more or less say what is natural in their case. You can go to forest, to jungle, to savanna, anywhere. But humans are everywhere. They always use some kind of culture, some kind of technology. They always create more and more. What is natural for humans? I think permanent change, and always creating and inventing something new to cope with the environment.
Excellent, excellent. And I think Jamil had a question, so if you want to go ahead and ask that.
Yeah, I typed it in the chat earlier. I was just wondering, and this is just me being completely open to any answers. I said we talk about the ethical considerations of an individual who doesn't have a say in what biomedical modifications occur to them as an embryo. And then you say ideally these modifications would be beneficial and not harmful. So what is the argument against the genetic modification when people today don't have a say if their mother drinks while pregnant or they grew up in a household that smokes? And then if I could just add one thing to that too, I guess a big consideration in ethics would be autonomy, and especially in medicine, medical autonomy. And so if you could say, if it's the parent's choice whether or not their child is, genetically modified to have enhancements for space travel or for whatever reason, the parent also has the option now to abort the child. So, if you're able to do that, why can't you say we want to have germline, modifications?
Yes, I agree. I agree that autonomy is a big challenge, responsibility for decisions. And if I can add something which I didn't mention, but now I see after your question that this is an important point, the concept of open future. Of course, parents are making a lot of decisions on behalf of their children, but in good faith. Yes, we believe that I have, as a parent, a right to decide, because I expect that it's in good interest of my child. I will not send him to school. It will be rather not in good interest in his life in the future. So on behalf of my child, for his good interest in good faith. But of course, germline modification is not like sending to school. So the argument from open future is good here, because you should think in which scenario you will make the future for your children more open. When you will open more possibilities, when you will modify his embryo, when you will modify your future children as embryo now, or when you will not modify. Some people tell that when you will not modify, you leave open future. Others will tell when you will modify. Let's assume that it's possible to improve genes which are responsible for intelligence or cognition. Let's assume that something like that will be possible. And you as a parent can choose, like in free market, should I make such modification or not? And I don't know, maybe when you will modify this embryo of your future children to improve his intelligence, whatever it will be measured by IQ or another way, maybe you will open more possibilities for him in society. When you will decide not to apply, maybe his open future will be open to less extent, but on the other side, we know that there is a lot of other factors which are involved in human intelligence, of course. So it's hard to say, but it can be problematic in a situation when we will have such update, like let's assume now is 2050 and we have such toolkit, germline gene editing 1.0, and all parents apply to their children. as embryo. But after 5 years, we will meet in market germline gene editing 2.0, and all prospective parents having children 5 years later, they will produce more updated generation of next children. So your child, when will be 20, will compete on the free, when will be 25, will compete on the free market with child who will be 20 from this next generation 2.0. And when this is the question also about privacy of medical data. If employer can see if you are modified or no, we don't know how it will work in such future society in 20, 40 years. Let's assume that you should disclose your possible enhancement, like in your CV, you have language capacity, university, and such stuff. You should show, I am modified genetically, toolkit 1.0, or he is modified 2.0, another one 3.0. If I am employer, probably I will choose this 3.0 candidate. So in this sense, when we will take a look from this perspective, it can be really horrible situation, because now we have excluded billions of people who are wrong because they were born few years earlier. So this is the problem related also to your question about responsibility of parents, because we don't know if what I will do now, it looks like something good, like improvement, but I don't know. You know, where will be my future child in 20 years, in 40 years, if this particular feature will be his advantage or maybe big disadvantage in another environment? Or what about it will be like some genetic enhancement arms race. Every generation we will have better, more and more enhanced people, and it will be such race between generations. So I think this is such kind of answer to your question, maybe not directly.
No, that's something I wasn't even considering. It's a really good point, actually. Yeah, it's not just about space.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you for coming here too. I actually have to get going. And thanks, Gautam, for setting it up.
Okay, thanks.
Take care.
I think that's towards the end of it, Dr. Szocik. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about,
Thank you very much.
your work and about astrobioethics. It certainly got me thinking about challenges that I had not considered before, and to consider, if we are to modify humans, what is a one or set of qualities that basically make a person, and how do you consider an enhancement, right? And what are enhancements? So, and it's not just biological, it's cultural, it's social, these kinds of things. So this was a very, very interesting, hour and a half or so, and I certainly appreciate your time. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy day to talk to us,
Thanks.
and educate us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Yep. Take care. Have a good rest of your day. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend.
Take care.